This video will be an introduction to probability. In this video, we'll go through a few basic points about probability, and we'll also go through a few basic calculations. First, let's look at the definition of probability. The probability of an event is the likelihood of that event occurring. An event with a small probability is unlikely to occur, and an event with a large probability is likely to occur. First, a probability can only be calculated for a random event. In other words, a probability can only be calculated for an event in which the outcome depends on chance. It's possible to calculate a probability for a random event, like a coin toss, or the type of card that's drawn from a shuffle deck, but it's not possible to calculate the probability for a non-random event, like the probability that your professor lets class out early today. Second, a probability is always a number between 0 and 1. An event with a probability of 0 never happens, and an event with a probability of 1 always happens. In other words, an event with a probability of 0 is an impossible event, and an event with a probability of 1 is a certain event. Third, an outcome with a larger probability is more likely to occur. As you go from 0 up toward 1, you're looking at more and more likely events. An event with a probability of 0.1 is really unlikely. An event with a probability of 0.4 is more likely, and an event with a probability of 0.8 is even more likely. Fourth, if you multiply a probability by 100, you get the percentage of the time that an event occurs. Here's an example. Let's imagine that a certain event has a probability of 0.35. 0.35 times 100 equals 35. So, an event with a probability of 0.35 happens 35% of the time. Here's another example of this point. When you flip a coin, you have a 0.50 probability of a head. In other words, the probability of a head is 1/2. When you multiply 0.50 by 100, you get 50, which means that if you keep flipping a coin over and over again, you'll get a head 50% of the time. Fifth, a probability tells you how often an event will occur over the long run, over a large number of trials, but not how often an event will occur during a small fixed number of trials. Here's an example. If you flip a coin 100 times, you might not get half heads and half tails. You might get 70 heads and 30 tails, or you might get 80 heads and 20 tails. However, if you keep flipping a coin over and over again, over the long run, you will get heads 50% of the time. So we've covered all of the important points about probability. Let's now look at the basic formula for calculating a probability. A probability is calculated by dividing the number of ways that an event could occur by the total number of possible outcomes during a certain trial. Here's one example of using this formula. A jar has 12 marbles. 3 of the marbles in the jar are red. If a marble is randomly selected from the jar, what's the probability that the marble will turn out to be red? Well, let's count the number of ways that we could get a red marble. There's three red marbles in the jar, so there's 3 ways of getting red. We'll put that number on top, that's X. There are 12 possible outcomes because there are 12 marbles in the jar, so let's put 12 on the bottom. That's N. 3 divided by 12 is 0.25, so the probability of red is 0.25. We got the probability by just dividing X by N. If we round the answer to 1 decimal point, it's 0.3. Here's another example. When a piece of dice is tossed, what's the probability of getting an odd number? Well, on a piece of dice, there's 3 odd sides. There's 1, 3, and 5. So there's 3 ways to get an odd number. There's also 6 total sides that could appear. So 3 divided by 6 is 0.5, and that's the answer. X divided by N is 0.5. So this video was just a basic introduction into probability. We covered a few important points about probability, and we also covered a few basic examples of calculating probabilities.